There are people who wake up every morning and choose silence over noise, presence over performance, reality over the constant urge to be seen. And in a world that never stops scrolling, that choice feels almost rebellious. You've probably noticed it in small moments, like when everyone around you instinctively reaches for their phones in a quiet room, and you don't. Or when a beautiful sunset appears, and instead of capturing it, you just stand there and feel it fully, uninterrupted. Maybe you've felt that strange distance when conversations drift toward trends, influencers, and posts you've never seen, leaving you slightly outside the loop, yet oddly at peace. If this resonates with you, take a moment to subscribe, not for noise, but for clarity, for understanding, for a deeper look into the quiet corners of the human mind, and ask yourself gently, when was the last time you experienced something without the urge to share it? There's a quiet emotional world inside people who don't use social media, one that often goes unseen, misunderstood, or even judged. It's not always about rejection of the world, but sometimes about protecting something fragile within it. Psychologically, this behavior often connects to a lower need for external validation and a stronger internal reference system, something psychologists like Edward Deci and Richard Ryan described in their self-determination theory, where intrinsic motivation becomes more fulfilling than external approval. Studies suggest that over 4.8 billion people worldwide use social media, meaning those who don't are navigating a reality that most others no longer experience in its raw form. Researchers have found that constant exposure to curated lives can increase comparison and anxiety, while stepping away often reduces these effects. People who avoid social media often display subtle patterns. They tend to observe more than they broadcast. They value depth over frequency in relationships. They are comfortable with delayed responses, and they don't feel the same urgency to document every moment. Their lives are less fragmented, but sometimes more isolated. It's like living in a house without mirrors, in a world obsessed with reflections, where you no longer see yourself through others' eyes, but that also means you must face yourself directly. And that is not always easy. There is a quiet strength in this, but also a quiet weight, because choosing not to participate in something so widespread can make you feel invisible, misunderstood, or even disconnected from shared cultural moments. At its core, the absence of social media is not just about what is missing, but about what is preserved. Attention remains intact. Thoughts are uninterrupted. Emotions are processed without immediate exposure. People who don't use social media often develop a different relationship with time, one that moves slower, deeper, and sometimes heavier. They may notice details others miss, like the tone in someone's voice, the subtle shift in energy in a room, or the quiet beauty in ordinary moments. But this heightened awareness can also come with a cost. Without the constant distraction of scrolling, they are left alone with their thoughts more often. And not all thoughts are gentle. Research in psychology suggests that when external stimulation decreases, internal reflection increases, which can lead to greater self-awareness but also deeper rumination. This creates a unique emotional landscape, where clarity and overthinking exist side by side. Over time, certain patterns begin to form. They may become more selective about who they spend time with, because connection feels more meaningful when it's not diluted. They might struggle to relate to conversations driven by online culture, creating a subtle sense of separation. They often value privacy deeply, sometimes to the point where sharing even small details feels uncomfortable. And they tend to measure their lives not by visibility, but by authenticity, even when that authenticity goes unseen. Imagine standing in a quiet forest while everyone else is in a crowded city filled with lights, noise, and constant activity. The forest offers peace, clarity, and space to breathe, but it can also feel lonely when you realize how far you are from the crowd. This is the emotional paradox they live in. And it's important to acknowledge that this choice, whether intentional or instinctive, is not always easy. There are moments of doubt, moments of wondering if they are missing out, moments of feeling disconnected from a world that seems to move faster every day. But as time passes, something shifts. The absence of constant comparison begins to feel like freedom. The lack of digital noise becomes a form of mental clarity, and the silence, once uncomfortable, starts to feel like home. They begin to realize that boredom is not emptiness, but a doorway to deeper thought. They learn to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it instantly. Conversations become longer, more present, less interrupted by the urge to check something. Their memory of moments becomes stronger because it isn't outsourced to a device. They start to notice how often others break eye contact to return to a screen, and it quietly changes how they perceive connection. There is also a subtle reclaiming of identity, one that is not shaped by trends but by lived experience. Yet at times, this can make them feel out of sync, like they are moving to a different rhythm than everyone else. They may question whether this slower pace will cost them opportunities or relevance. Still, beneath that uncertainty, there is a growing sense of ownership over their mind, and that ownership becomes something they are no longer willing to trade for constant stimulation. What begins as a difference slowly becomes an identity. The longer someone stays away from social media, the more they start to see the world differently. Not better, not worse, just differently. They begin to understand that their value is not tied to visibility, that their experiences do not need an audience to be real, and that connection does not require constant updates to exist. This realization doesn't come all at once. It builds slowly, through quiet moments of awareness, through noticing how their mind feels compared to those constantly connected, through recognizing the subtle peace that comes from being present. Psychologically, this reflects a shift from external validation to internal stability, where self-worth is less dependent on feedback and more grounded in personal experience. But this path is not without its challenges. The world continues to evolve around digital interaction, and choosing to remain outside of it can sometimes create barriers, both socially and professionally. The tension can grow quietly, not as conflict, but as a lingering question of belonging. And yet, within that tension lies something important, a signal, not of disconnection, but of intention. Because choosing not to engage with social media is not always about avoidance. It is often about alignment. Alignment with what feels real, what feels meaningful, what feels true. If you find yourself in this space, it might help to gently reflect, not to change, not to conform, but to understand your own reasons more clearly. To notice what you gain, what you lose, and what truly matters to you beyond the noise. There is no right or wrong path here, only awareness. And maybe that is the quiet truth behind it all. In a world that constantly asks you to be seen, there is a rare kind of courage in choosing simply to be. Over time, they may also develop a deeper tolerance for solitude, not as something to endure, but as something to appreciate. Their sense of self becomes less reactive and more grounded, shaped by reflection rather than reaction. They may find that their emotional highs and lows become less influenced by external comparison. There is a quiet confidence that begins to form, one that doesn't need to be announced to exist. Still, there are moments when they feel invisible in a world driven by presence and updates. Moments where opportunities, connections, or recognition seem to pass them by unnoticed. This can create an internal conflict between staying true to themselves and adapting to a system that rewards visibility. Yet even in that conflict, there is clarity. They begin to see that not everything that is visible is valuable, and not everything valuable is visible. This realization becomes grounding. It allows them to move through the world with intention rather than urgency. And in that stillness, they discover something many people are still searching for: the ability to exist fully, even when no one is watching.